Hi, it's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome back to my channel where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials as well as give a lot of baking business tips. And as per usual, I will be sharing with you the exact pricing of this cake. So to start off, I'm just leveling off my vanilla cake here, and this is the recipe that I usually use. I like it because it's nice and stable. So when you are looking for a vanilla cake recipe, make sure that you look for one that is really nice and stable because you are going to be carving it somewhat for this particular cake. And if you want to get really fancy, you can definitely cut off those more browned edges. I personally like the taste of them, so I leave them on, but I know some people like to remove them. Now, my husband is fairly into comic books, so he said to me, Ashley, you have to try your very best to make it the standard size of a comic book. Now, I really didn't know going into this what the standard size of a comic book was, but I think what we said was it was around 6 inches and a little bit by 10 inches. So I decided, perfect, I'm going to go with that 10 inches then, and then I'm just going to cut this down so it's a little bit over 6 inches. Now, this is a very rare thing. You're not going to see me do this a lot, but I did take out my ruler, and I did get that ruler from Brandcast, which I did with YouTube, and so it's a very special ruler to me, and I decided, you know what, I better use it. Let me know down in the comments below, are you someone that's very precise with your cake decorating, or do you just like to wing it? Because most of the time, I like to wing it, and I kind of attribute that to my friend, because we often did a lot of cake decorating together, and I just see her winging it all the time, and it seems to work out, and she seems to save a lot of time, so that's why I've also gotten into that habit, but I'm noticing more and more that sometimes it is good to be a little bit more precise in my case. So today I'm going in with a dark chocolate ganache with a 3-to-1 ratio, the 3 being the chocolate and the 1 being that heavy whipping cream with just a little bit of butter added. Now I will say going that high of a ratio for every single part of this, including the filling, means that you are going to have a little bit more of a chocolatey and less velvety, smooth kind of texture to the ganache. Now, since this was for my son's birthday cake, I knew that he wasn't going to be that picky at all about the bite of the ganache, and most of the people that ended up consuming this cake were children, so I didn't think I needed to be that picky. However, if I were making this for people that were a little bit more discerning, I would definitely take that down to a 2-to-1 ratio for the ganache, maybe even a little bit less, because then that way the inside of the ganache filling stays nice and velvety and smooth, and it just tastes really, really luscious. But I did want to make sure I went with the ganache on the outside with a 3-to-1 ratio, because if you don't, it's really tricky to get these nice hard edges quickly. You'll notice here I'm really taking my time using my clothing steamer to get rid of all of that residue on the board. I used to have an issue with dirty boards all the time. After I started steaming my boards, no issues anymore. Then you'll notice I actually steamed my cake completely. I used to add shortening to it, and sometimes I still do, but when I really want a pure flavor, I'll just go in with my steamer. That being said, when you do it that way, you can't really make mistakes, so you can't re-lift your fondant, or else you're going to end up with a lot of residue under your fondant. Whereas if you just use shortening to adhere it, chances are most of your cake will be pretty dry, especially if you're using an American buttercream on the outside. Then you're going to be just fine, and you can readjust that fondant. Now, although this is a squared off cake, I am not using the paneling technique, which some people like to use. I just find that it's a lot easier for me when it's a small kind of rectangular prism like this. I can get away with just placing all of the fondant on top and not have to worry about measuring. See, there I go again, trying to avoid using that ruler and measurement. And at this point, don't worry too much if the edges look very rounded and it's not looking how you want it to. This was one of my biggest mistakes when I first started cake decorating. I would fiddle so much with that I would end up getting elephant skin on there because I didn't really take away most of that weight on the bottom quickly enough. So you definitely want to make sure that you get rid of all of that excess and then go ahead and make sure you smooth everything out. Now you'll still notice not everything is super sharp on this. That's because I'm personally going to be doing a lot to the edges of this cake anyway. Now, my idea behind this cake was I wanted to make it look like a stack of comic books, and I also wanted to make it look kind of old and a little bit water damaged. So you'll notice that I am cutting off the corner here just to make it look like the edges of the page are curling up. Now, the tricky part about this was the fondant needed to be thick enough so I could actually slice off just a little bit, but I also needed to make sure that page looked thin enough so it looked believable as paper. Now, my smoother kept sticking a little bit to this cake. This can happen if your cake is really, really cold and your fondant gets a little bit sticky. So what I like to do is I like to put just a little bit of cornstarch on that smoother that's going against the cake, just so that it has a little bit more slip. But don't over cornstarch your cake, otherwise it can get really, really hard and then it's just going to crack on you. Now, when I was creating the indentations for the pages, I was being really, really careful, but you're going to see later on how haphazard I end up going with this because I wanted it to look like the pages were kind of falling apart and some things weren't as perfect. Even after this stage here where I'm taking this really, really large scraper and also indenting some more, I actually end up doing even more. Now, this is a stylistic choice. So, of course, if you want your comic book stack to look fairly perfect, then I would just stick with the first thing that I did, which was really just indenting it with that tool and making sure that everything was very evenly spaced. Now, of course, comic books have several pages. It's not just, a few pages here and there that are thick, so you want to make sure that you really get in a lot of that indentation. Now, you might be wondering, why am I using fond dust instead of a black petal dust? Well, there's two reasons. The first reason is I don't have black petal dust on hand. I do have fond dust. Now, the secondary reason is because what I like about using the fond dust, especially for something like this, where I really want to make it look like it's an old textured thing, is that when I go back in and I steam fond dust, there are inevitably particles that end up going all over the cake that you can't actually see until that steam really brings it to life. I'm also going in with a little bit of ivory as well, just to give it that oldish kind of look, and for good measure, swiping it with a little bit of white. Now, for the binding of the comic book side, I want to make sure that that's a little bit more punchy and doesn't look as old looking. So I'm going in with a really bright lemon yellow color. And then there was also some other colors on the comic book that I really just needed to mesh together because that's what the comic book cover looked like. So I just kind of imagined what the side of the comic book would look like, and I just kind of followed suit. Now, if you don't have an edible airbrush machine, you could very easily achieve this with petal dusts as well. Now, I wanted to show you this, my ridiculous setup for my projection. Usually I project onto cookies if I'm going to project at all, so I really had to make sure that this was nice and high so I could get a really nice big projection. When I had finally finished drawing all of this, my knees were pretty much done by the end of this. Now, I'm really not sketching out every single detail. The whole point of this cake is that it's going to look like Spider-Man is coming out of the cake, or breaking out of the comic book, I should say. And so I'm not actually going to draw Spider-Man on here, just the shape of him. And I really didn't do every single detail either. I just did the pertinent details that I knew I wouldn't be able to fake on my own. One thing is I really struggle with proportions. I can make it happen eventually, but I will make mistakes. So I thought, let's just get rid of that part since this cake has already taken me an exceptionally long time, and let's just trace out the things that matter. Like all of these clouds here, I'm really just doing that free-handed. It kind of looks like what was on the front of the comic book cover that I'm trying to emulate. I'm using edible paints today, and if you don't have edible paints, you can use your edible gel food colorant and then just mix it in with a little bit of vodka. I do recommend Everclear, as it is going to give you the truest color that you're looking for out of your colorant. Sometimes I find other vodkas, or even if you're using a lemon extract, it can slightly alter the color that you're wanting. Now, there really are no rules to this, and there are no specifics. You're really just kind of painting this as if you were painting a regular coloring book. Now, if you have painted something that you really don't like, what I would suggest is you just let it dry and then try to paint over top. It doesn't function exactly like regular paints do, but it's definitely worth trying. Now what I'm doing is I'm just adding a little bit more detail on the side of the cake, really just to give it that realistic look that it's a bunch stacked together. Now remember we talked about how I said I did even more treatment to this page. So after everything was colored, after everything had dried for a significant amount of time, I'm going in again and adding more indentations. See how it kind of gives it that look where things are breaking apart and it looks like some pages have maybe been turned out a little bit too much. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Now this video was already getting quite long, so I decided that for the actual Spider-Man figure, I'm going to put that in a separate video. It does take quite a bit of time to make that, and there's a lot of structural things going on inside of there. So I decided to make that a separate video for you guys. But here you'll see that I'm adding in the little details, and I did place that directly into the cake, trying to make it look like he's bursting out with his webs there. And I know when I released the short featuring this cake that y'all thought Spider-Man might have been doing something a little bit different, but I still think that he looks like he's bursting out of the comic book, and that is what I'm going to continue to say. Now for this little speech bubble there, I just cut it out of edible wafer paper, and then I drew on with my favorite edible pen. And here is my son's reaction to his cake.
His webs, yeah!
What else do you see?
Spider.
And what's he saying? You see, he's saying something right here?
Yeah.
He's saying happy 3rd birthday, Landon.
Yeah.
He's talking to you.
He's Peter Parker.
It's Peter Parker, yeah!
Now let's get into the pricing. Now I once again struggled with pricing this cake. However, the reason that the pricing is up there at that price point is because this took an exceptionally long time. And really that figure is what's driving up the price, as well as having to hand paint all of that top portion. If this were done with an edible image, that would bring the price down. Now let's get into the subscriber submission of the video. I am feeling the fresh fruit and the pink on this cake. Be sure to go and drop them a like and drop them a comment. And if you want to be the next featured subscriber submission of the video, then please follow me at SD Bake Shop on Instagram, where you can either tag me in a photo or send me a photo. Any and all dessert levels are welcome. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!